Hello and welcome to Prime Business with me, Pius Kojobaka. The International Monetary Fund management team is in town to engage government on its policies and economic direction. My colleague George Yafe has been following up on this meeting and has more in this report.
This is not a program review or a staff engagement, but rather a management team visit. This usually is carried out by the IMF when there is a change in government, but the program in that country has not ended. Therefore, the team wants to engage this new administration about their economic policies and how that will impact on the program that Ghana has with the IMF. Joy Businesses learned that the team came to town yesterday and they are likely to finalize their meeting this weekend or Monday. Sources say the meetings are proceeding as planned, at least for now. However, persons close to government say this engagement may offer them an opportunity to test the waters when it comes to their push to renegotiate Ghana's program with the IMF. The IMF, on the other hand, has told Joy Business that even though they are not opposed to the program being reviewed, whatever government wants to push should be in line with the framework of the fund program. Now, Finance Minister Designate Forson has also disclosed that if confirmed by Parliament, he will be moving for more funding for Ghana's program with the IMF and also a possible program extension.
Longer on the IMF program because finance professor at Andrews University, Williams Pipra, is backing calls for the Mahama government to seek extra funding from the International Monetary Fund to fast-track economic recovery. According to him, government must seek a 2-year extension of the current IMF program to unlock loans and funding for development and policy implementation. He spoke to Joy Business.
If you remember, sometime in July 2023, I mentioned that the 3-year program, the IMF program, was not enough to solve Ghana's problem. Looking at the extent of debt distress that we were in, we were above 100% in terms of debt to GDP. To solve such a challenge, you need about 5 to 7 years. So if you ask me, it's in the right direction to seek about 2 years extension to the program, and that will unlock concessionary loans from IMF and the bilateral institutions to help the Ghanaian agenda. And then also, you notice that the NDC, in their manifesto, they have a major plan, which they call it the big push, a 10 billion developmental agenda. This must find its way into the IMF program. So a review and then an extension of that program is in line, and then the NDC will be able to find a way to incorporate the big push agenda, which focuses on infrastructural development. And then they can be able to get some funding additional funding from the World Bank, from IMF themselves, and then other, let's say, European Union, on the concessionary loan, just focusing on developmental agenda. So that is the way to go, and I think that is in the right direction.
Let's talk more about the economy because economist Professor Lord Mensah has welcomed plans by the finance minister designate to cut down expenditure, arguing it will reduce the budget deficit within the frame of the IMF program. Speaking to Joy Business, Professor Mensah stated that it would help contain inflation going forward.
Yeah, it is feasible in the sense that if you look at what has been happening in the past under the same IMF program, I can tell you that we're dealing with over 100 ministers and different, agencies. And if you look at the budget lines, especially when you pick one of the appropriations lines that we have over the past years, you'll get to know that some allocations we were doing in the past, they were not yielding the necessary economic outputs that is expected. And so having a new administration that is prepared to cut down expenditure, of course, is a way of reducing the budget deficit within the frame of the IMF program. And once you cut down expenditure and you're able to allocate the little that you have efficiently, it tends to control and shape in inflation very well. Well, I don't see it to be difficult because it has to do with reallocations and overly identifying where exactly you're supposed to spend to control inflation. If you pick, Ghana Statistical Service data, clearly there's an indication that food inflation is one of the problems. It's unfortunate in the past we've been spending on planting for food and jobs, but it hasn't yielded the necessary results that is expected by reducing food prices. So from where I sit, if the new administration is coming in force and they want to allocate, resources into agriculture, certainly targeting certain foodstuffs, will be very, very important in controlling inflation.
Now, Chief Executive of Daylex Finance, Joe Jackson, has maintained that President John Mahama's first budget will prove whether he is committed to supporting the private sector. The president, in his inaugural speech, appealed to private businesses to come on board to help reset the economy. Now, speaking on PM Express Business Edition, Mr. Jackson noted that the budget will give clear guidelines about the president's invitation.
The button, exactly. That is going to be the first test. Because anyway, it's the budget, that's the instrument that the government is going to use. We're going to see where the taxes are going. We're going to see what new taxes are going to be introduced or taxes that are going to be taken out. We're going to see a measure of what reliefs that they're going to give to innovation, to growth. What measure of reliefs they're going to give to companies that have targeted youth employment. Part of the promise says we will target the industries that engage with the youth. We are under an IMF program. The good thing is that there's a strong indication that there will be some renegotiation to give the people of Ghana some relief. We expect that the reliefs will be, whatever reliefs will be obtained, it is the private sector that will be prioritized, because it is the private sector that will really animate the 24-hour economy. It is the private sector that will provide the jobs that the people of Ghana desire. So we expect that within the context of how dire the public purses, within the context of an IMF program, within the context of renegotiating the IMF program, the private sector will be prioritized so that we can deliver the innovation, the growth, the jobs that this economy requires.
The Association of Ghana Industries has revealed that the demand for their goods and other manufactured items picked up strongly from the last quarter of 2024. This is coming on the back of significant challenges hit the sector over the past 2 years. Now, Chief Executive of the association, Seth Chumakwabwa, said the sector has improved.
Things are going on, except that we want to improve, we want to upscale, we want to do business, we want to expand, we want to venture into other areas, we want to go to other markets and all that. So there's always room and a bigger scope of business that we can do. And therefore, if a president comes in and say, we are open for business, my understanding of it is that whatever you are doing, can we upscale? Can we do more of it? Can we venture into more areas? But then saying so is one thing, and being able to achieve that is another. And achieving it requires a whole lot of things. Those deep discussions we are going to go into it with government itself, with the various ministers that will be appointed. But the critical thing is that you are encouraging businesses to come and do more business. And here we are not really looking at foreign direct investment or foreign businesses, it's local businesses as well. And that's where we have to sit down and say, what do we do to make sure that businesses can thrive?
And when we draw the line again between, deliberately helping local industries and also not shutting the door to the FDI, because it's always a big challenge for managers of the economy.
I don't think it's that big a challenge, because you have laws, you have policies that you can actually put in place. In the petroleum industry, they've set up a local content committee, and they're always looking at specific businesses that is not so much sophisticated to do. It doesn't require so much capital. It doesn't require any special expertise. You can reserve it for local businesses and still generate competition amongst them. There are certain products in the Ghanaian environment that you can really protect. And sometimes, I work with manufacturers a lot, and I can tell you that sometimes it's not so much the question of competition. It is the fairness in the trade area. There are people who are producing here. You go to the market, and there's influx of these products coming into the market. And if you look at the prices at which they are selling it, they're actually selling below cost. So there's no way the local producer can compete. And that is an unfair trading. So we think that even if you're able to police the borders.
Away from that, the Public Interest and Accountability Committee, PIAC, is worried over Ghana's involvement in numerous arbitration cases against oil and gas companies operating in the country. According to PIAC, the situation could send a bad signal to investors seeking to enter Ghana's oil and gas industry. Speaking to Joy Business on the recent arbitration between Talo and the Ghana Revenue Authority, as well as ENI Afina Sankofa Unitization Directive, Chairman of PIAC, Constantine Kujeji, said the development is setting a bad precedent for Ghana.
There was also some in terms of that as against the directive from the ministry, and the companies were not in favor of that. So they went into arbitration, and the award is to the effect that the manner in which the unitization was authorized was not proper. Now, why am I giving you these details? If these things happen, they are not good for our investors. They will say, how you treat them is not fair, and it drives away investment. And we are a petroleum revenue management committee. If you drive the goods away, you will never get the feathers. So it is important that you attract the goods. You have to attract them. So we think that it's not too good for our image as a country. And next time when we are doing these things, we must be careful. So it's something that PIAC noted, that the outcome of the arbitration was not favorable.
Hello again, we continue with the rest of our stories. And the Vice President in charge of West and Central Africa at the World Bank, Osmanu Osuwange, has been speaking at a rehabilitation story. All right, so I'm told we shall rectify that and bring you that story subsequently. But you're still watching Prime Business with me, Pius Kojo Baka, and we've got more stories when you log on to myjoyonline.com/business. We've got the latest international business news for you. Let's now touch on our World Bank story we have for you. The Vice President in charge of West and Central Africa at the World Bank, Ousmane Diangana, has called for increased investment in the agricultural sector to boost socio-economic growth. According to Mr. Diangana, prioritizing agriculture will improve food security and reduce unemployment. He made this known when he inspected the rehabilitation of the Kwon Irrigation Scheme, an initiative under World Bank's West Africa Food System Resilience Project. Here's a report.
The visit to the Kwon Irrigation Scheme by the World Bank Regional Vice President for Western and Central Africa, Ousmane Diangana, was to observe progress of work on the rehabilitation of the scheme and to interact with value chain actors within the enclave. The initiative falls under the West Africa Food System Resilience Project, which is a Government of Ghana and World Bank funded program. The Kwon Irrigation Project supplies water to over 2,000 smallholder farmers and 13 commercial farms spanning over 4,000 hectares of land. Expressing contentment about the outcome of the project, Mr. Diangana called for more investment in the agric sector to improve the livelihoods of the people, particularly women and youth.
For the government, spending a lot on rice import, mean that those resources are diverted from financing some critical development area, education, health, etc., while there is a possibility to produce more locally. And also in terms of job creation, of course, agriculture, for all our country is the key, is the engine for job. So therefore, there is here a necessity to scale up.
Project coordinator at FSRP, Osei Owusu-Ajimai, highlighted some of the projects geared towards building a resilient agric value chain.
Preparations are therefore fast advancing to construct and refurbish pivotal value chain facilities across the country, including veterinary laboratories in Domahinkro and Accra, CSIR, Council for Scientific Research Laboratories in different parts of the country, rehabilitating warehouses, border posts, markets to build our capacity to participate in a viable regional trade.
A beneficiary of the scheme, Charles Hombe, shared some insights.
We've seen a boost for the past 5 years, especially after the rehabilitation. We've seen a boost. We were producing 4 tons, 5 tons, but currently we have 5.5 and 6 tons per hectare. So I think it's very, very good.
The rehabilitated irrigation scheme has so far improved yields of farmers by about 25%.
Now, data shows that Ghana's agricultural sector contributed about $11.7 billion to the country's 2023 gross domestic product. In contrast, agriculture in North Carolina, one of the 50 states of the United States of America, contributed about $111 billion to the country's GDP in the same year. Now, the difference highlights the impact of continuous investment in innovations and emerging technologies like biotechnology. Now, in today's episode of Food Chain, my colleague Emma Davis explores how North Carolina leverages biotechnology to enhance agricultural productivity.
The term biotechnology was coined by a Hungarian engineer, Karl Erecke, in 1919 to refer to the science and methods that permit products to be produced from raw materials with the aid of living organisms. Since then, biotechnology has transformed various industries, including producing many biopharmaceuticals and vaccines, helping forensic experts with DNA fingerprinting and profiling, and converting biomass into biofuels, among others. In agriculture, biotechnology aims to introduce sustainable agricultural practices with best yield potential and minimal adverse effects on the environment. A key area of application is pest management, as emphasized by Dr. Dominic Rusigi, an entomologist at North Carolina State University's Extension.
So we'd have a scout would go into the field. They'd use they'd use one of these. They'd sample different portions of the field. You wouldn't just want to sample the edge or the middle or whatever else. And then they would take an average and they would say, from that average, if I have this many corn earworm per row feet, should I apply an insecticide? So that's a pretty basic concept that we use. And we do a lot of work reevaluating economic thresholds because they change over time as farming practices change. So, and then new pests come in that we have to develop economic thresholds for. So we just do a lot of work with that. I just want to it yields more when you grow it as an annual, but it makes producing a tropical plant in a non-tropical location difficult. Yeah. It thinks it's a tree because it is, and what it produces are pre-floral buds that we call squares. And when the plant is stressed, it tends to drop those squares. So it could be from environmental stress or it could be from an insect. And that's not good for cotton production because you need to retain the squares to have bolls to pollinate so you can make the lint inside of the bolls, right? So in North Carolina, we really have to struggle early season because we're on the northern limits of cotton production. When we plant cotton in May, it tends to be a little bit cold for the plant. It comes up and it just kind of sits there, and we really want the plant to grow very quickly. And the plant's a tropical tree. It's not worried about growing quickly. It's developing a root system, right? Because it's gonna be a tree, but we really don't want it to be a tree. And then we have to make sure we retain these squares later on in the season. And so cotton insect management has been very, very dynamic in North Carolina. It changes all the time. Prior to the 1980s, we had a very important insect pest called the boll weevil, which I'm sure you've heard of. The boll weevil really limited cotton production. There was a massive area-wide eradication program to eliminate boll weevil from the United States. It's now been eliminated except for parts of southern Texas and Mexico, and they're working really hard on eradicating it there. After boll weevil was eliminated as a problem, the primary insect pests we managed were an insect called the bollworm, which is the same insect you saw earlier, just with a different name, the corn earworm, and an insect called the tobacco budworm. Tobacco budworm and bollworm are very closely related. They look very similar. They have some different habits and preferences and host preferences and things like that. In 1996, when BT cotton was commercialized, tobacco budworm was eliminated as a pest in the system. BT cotton for tobacco budworm, I would say arguably has been the most successful out of any pest that we've tried to control. We mentioned European corn borer earlier. We have resistance to European corn borer now in the upper Midwest and parts of Canada. We have never, to my knowledge, been able to grow a tobacco budworm on BT cotton. It just completely eliminates the issue. Bollworm is a different issue, right? Corn earworm. The traits were not quite as effective for bollworm, and so that continues to persist as a problem. Because we sprayed cotton less, other insects moved in to fill the niche, and those were insects in the piercing, sucking complex. You may have heard of stink bugs. They've got a hypodermic needle called a stylet. They feed inside of bowls on the seed. The seed develops the lint, and so the stink bugs can rob yield directly by feeding on the seed, reducing lint production, but they can also introduce pathogens into the bowls that can rot the lint. Once we got our management on stink bugs, another insect started to become a problem, the tarnished plant bug. So we're going to look at some tarnished plant bug here. And then another insect that we've had to contend with early season is called thrips. Thrips is a very small insect, maybe the size of a pepper. They're all over this plant. They're just kind of too tiny to see. When the plant emerges as a seedling, it's got these big fleshy pads called cotyledons. Maybe you've seen that when you've seen seedlings emerge. Those thrips preferentially lay eggs in the cotyledons. The larva thrips emerge from those cotyledons and begin to feed on the developing leaf, and they hold that plant back. And so we really want to release the plant so we can grow. We want to get rid of the thrips. And the tarnished plant bugs later on in the season feed on these squares with their piercing, sucking mouth parts. The squares subside. We want to retain those squares. And so the traditional way that we've managed both of these insects has been with foliar insecticides.
And you can watch the full episode on the Joy News channel tomorrow at 6 p.m. with my colleague Emma Davis. That's it for the bulletin. I am Pius Kojo Baka. For more stories, feel free to log on to myjoyonline.com/business. Great for serving you. Do have a lovely weekend. Prime Sports is next.